Welcome to another episode of Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. We are joined today by Mike Clelland, author of The Messenger, which is a nonfiction book about paranormal phenomena, and the novel The Unseen, which is the most recent thing I read by him, the most recent thing you put out, right, Mike?
Yeah, it's most recent thing. Exactly. Yes.
And some other books as well. Those are all on my list. Mike, thanks for joining us. How you doing today?
Great. It's my honor to be here.
So, I've actually mentioned this to a couple of people already, but anytime anyone's asked me about this book, The Unseen, because I've been posting about it a little bit,
Thank, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm like, yeah. It's keep going, keep going.
I would place it genre-wise as a mystery with paranormal leanings, but there is more to that. For me, as far as what somebody can get out of it, I would put it on. If I was in a bookstore and I was shelving books, I would put it on the same shelf as, for example, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or Siddhartha. And by that, what I mean is we've got fiction that's informed by the personal journey of the author.
Exactly. Very, yeah. Well said. Yeah, the main character is. If people know me, the main character is me. So he has more hair than me. I gave him a full head of hair.
I could tell that just doing some research, preparing for the interview and having read the book. I'm like, I can see
Oh, you've
from your
both read
time.
it.
Yes,
Oh
yes.
yeah.
I just finished it yesterday. It was wonderful. But I could see from like the timeline that you have on your website, the a lot of the connections that are in the story, which was really interesting to see.
Well, the story is for the most part set in 2009, and
Hmm.
that was for a couple reasons. One is that I wanted to do it before, like, and that was just the dawn of the smartphone era. I didn't want everyone to be like, well, let me call this person, or let me Google this,
Yeah.
or let me check something, or let me take a quick picture. I didn't want any of that. It's a little bit in there, and there's even a point when the main character, someone takes a picture, said, I took a picture, and they hand the thing to me. He said, you can zoom in on it. The main character goes,
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that. And that's an ancient chapter of mankind, it feels like at this point. And then the other reason is 2009 was really a powerful year for me personally. Like lots and lots and lots of stuff was happening in my life. So yeah. So, and then when I said it in that time, the character was about the same age as I am or would have been in 2009. So it was very much based on me.
Awesome. Yeah, it really it shines through, and I think in a way that adds to it, honestly. Now, as far as the obviously, a lot of people who do know you because of like the research and you're being as forthcoming as you are about experiences and things you've talked to people about. Um, could you maybe give our listeners a little bit of an overview of how you got where you are with this stuff, like the Cliff's notes, maybe?
Sure, and just go ahead. Feel free to interrupt me. I can be very long-winded on these kinds of things. So, in around 2006, I had a powerful set of experiences that, when you tell them, they don't really sound that interesting. I went camping with a young woman. Her name was Kristen. We're still close friends. I think I talked to her just the other day, and but at the time, I was living in Driggs, Idaho, which is right on the edge of Grand Teton National Park. We went camping for a few nights. It was two separate nights that were 4 days apart. So we just went out for one night, came back to town, and went out again. Both nights, we saw three owls. To have it happen once was pretty cool, but when it happened the second time, it seemed strange. And I've talked to a lot of bird biologists and wildlife biologists and sort of explained the story to them, and they kind of back away like I'm the crazy uncle at the family reunion. And but the but so it's so when I saw the owls, these were just normal owls. These were called short-eared owls. They're about 11 inches tall. They're not that. I mean, there's nothing paranormal about the event on the surface. Here's one odd detail. So the very first night when we saw the first owls, Kristen was talking about her deepest beliefs about God. And I had the thought like, whoa, I'm impressed with this person. It's a very thoughtful, smart, spiritual person. And at that moment, the first owl appeared, and then the second, and then the third. And it took me a while to put all this together, but that one small detail, at the moment she was talking about God and I was listening, and it was more than that. It was when I had the thought, like, whoa, like this was sort of a first date, and this was a stranger, and I was like, hey, there's more depth here in this person, and the owl appeared. Now, what also happened when I saw those owls is I heard a voice in my head. It's very murky because it could have been my own voice, it could have been from an outside source, but my very strong sense was that this was like an important message, and it was we were looking at real owls, and the voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And I didn't say that at the time, but I'm saying it now. So what happened was after seeing the owls the second time, Kristen and I got really a bit obsessed about looking up spirit meaning of owl, totem meaning of owl, the folklore of owl. But I, at the same time, started looking into my UFO experiences, which I had had a handful of kind of telling events in my life. And I was not going there. I was pushing those away. I was not going to deal with these things. I was in complete denial. The voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And I was like, at that point in my life, I was reading UFO literature, books and such, somewhat compulsively. And then that voice, after the event with the owls, I started looking into my own experiences. I started reaching out to researchers, Leo Sprinkle in particular, who was in Wyoming at the time, and what Leo would do is he'd say, hey, you know who you should talk to? You should talk to this person. And he'd give me a phone number, and I'd call him up, and we'd have a conversation, and I'd have this really strong heart to heart. I felt a real, true connection to the people who have had the UFO contact experience, and part of all this is I would ask the question, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And it wasn't 100%, but wow, is it enough? Oh, I can see you have an owl over your shoulder on your bookshelf there, just as I said that. It wasn't enough to it wasn't 100%, but wow, was it a very clear pattern. So in the next couple of years, I started a blog, and the theme of the blog was initially going to be synchronicities, which I've had a lot of, but it's very quickly morphed into owls and UFOs. And the story I just told here initially was one of the first posts I put here. The story of seeing the owls with Kristen I put that on the blog. So the blog was started in 2009. And what essentially happened is my old life crumbled. I was trying to hold on to that old life, and it wasn't working. I was changing. The world around me, or my circle of friends in the town I lived in, was staying the same. And I very quickly became sort of the focal point, the hub of anyone who had a UFO and owl experience would send a letter to me. And it was right from the very beginning. If you Googled UFO owl, my name would come up. And then the next 15 things below that would also be me. So if anyone anywhere in the world had an experience with a UFO and an owl, they were going to find me in about 2 mouse clicks. And they started sending me their stories. And what started out as a trickle has since turned into a torrent. It has not abated. There are more and more stories arriving in my email inbox day after day. It just goes up and up and up and up, the amount I'm receiving. For a while there, it kind of ebbs and flows, and I don't know quite the reason for that. I suspect it has something to do with like when a video is popular on YouTube, honestly, or gets put into the algorithm. I'll get a peek in some of these things. But for a while, I was getting about 6 a day, 6 really good stories a day, and as far as the stories are, people will say, and this is something that every UFO researcher knows about, and I've talked to plenty of them, people's letters often begin with, I've never told this to anyone. Or they'll say, I cannot tell my wife, I cannot tell my boss, but I'm going to tell you, here's my story. And the stories are so bizarre and so rich with mood. And after like 18, or it was about 15 years now that I've been doing this. It was 18 years ago that I saw The Owls with Kristen. It was 15 years ago when I started really receiving the stories. So for 15 years, I've been receiving these stories. I've been trying to see patterns in them. I've been trying to collate them. I've been trying to archive them. And I also feel very strongly, I don't want them to sit like on my computer. Like I don't want these to be stored away and not, I want these to be alive and out there. So I've been doing my best to to make sure that, oh, you might hear roosters in the background here. So I've been doing my very best. They get kind of noisy. They're very temperamental. But the stories have a theme and a mood that I can recognize, and those accounts turned into 3 books. Let's say my research and my interpretation and my struggling with what may or may not be there. I don't have a good answer to why their owls are showing up in connection with UFO reports, but I can say that it is a consistency. Again, not 100% of the people who see a UFO will also see an owl, and it's the other way around too. Like if you see an owl, it doesn't mean that's a paranormal event, but I've gotten pretty good at picking these out. So I put out 3 books, and it totals up to just about 1,000 pages, almost exactly 1,000 pages if you stack all 3 books on top of each other. And people ask me, "Hey, Mike, you're gonna write another book about owls?" And I'm like, "Nope. Like, if I can't say it in 1,000 pages, like it's not gonna it's not gonna do anyone any good for me to put another big fat book out where I essentially say the same thing." And then they go, "Do you have enough stories for another book?" And I'm like, "Good grief, I have enough stories for 100 books." The problem is it's the same story over and over again, essentially. Or let me say that it's a story with the same mood and flavor. So I this fiction book, I had it as an outline, as a rough thing. I was originally going to do it as a graphic novel in 2010. 2010, 2011. I was on fire to do this graphic novel, and I was making all kinds of notes, and I wrote a really clean treatment of the outline of the story. And I talked to some friends. Do you know Christopher Knowles? He runs the Secret Sun blog.
No, no, I don't
Oh,
think so.
it's a really interesting blog, a really thoughtful guy. But he had done a lot of work in the comic book industry. And so I contacted him, and I knew he'd worked into the comic book industry. And I said, what am I getting into? Like, I want to do this graphic novel, and I want to do it all myself. And here's my idea. And he's like, "Oh, don't you do it. Don't do it. Like, you need a team. Like you'll make yourself crazy of the amount of work that it's involved. So if you're a part of a team, one person does the writing, one person does the inking, one person does the coloring, one person does the layout." And I just was so disillusioned after hearing that. I didn't have enough money to hire anyone and like our team, let's say. So I just put it on the shelf. And after I'd finished the 3 books, I was like, good grief, I kind of need something. I want to write another book, but I don't want to write it. And I was like, you know what? I started that treatment a long time ago. So I pulled it out and I reread the treatment. And I was like, there's something here. And this kind of dovetailed with the pandemic. So
Hmm.
me and the rest of the world got stuck at home. And I started writing it as a novel. I originally thought it was going to be a novella. I was like, oh, this is going to come in at under 100 pages. It's pretty close to 350 pages. So that I didn't adhere to that very well. But what I tried to do was tell a fictional story that created the flavor and mood of the accounts I have been receiving. And many of the accounts in the story, I don't know if you could probably pick some things out, like, oh, I heard him say that in an interview, or I read that in one of his blog posts. A lot of it is me.
Hmm.
And I told some friends when they picked up the book, they were kind of like, what am I getting into? They'd ask me, and I was like, if things get really weird, if there's a part in the story that's really weird, it probably really happened. And and that I there's some exceptions to that, but that's kind of the tone of the book. And I also, as far as the fiction book, The Unseen, I tried to I was doing 2 different things. There's a surface level story. There's kind of a romance, and there's kind of a mystery, and there's a little bit of intrigue and such. And that was fun to write. And I got lost in that story. I really cared about the characters. And then below the waterline, I was trying to tell a more mythic tale, a more a more archetypal tale. And 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 I was really nervous when I kind of was on Amazon and I pushed the little button that said, publish this book, because I was like, what did I get myself into? Because that was pretty bold. And then the reviews started coming in, and people started reaching out to me and saying they'd read the book, and people got it. So that was a real relief because I didn't know what I was getting into trying to do this initially. So yeah, there was a very long answer to a very simple question.
No, it's great.
I mean, I think you accomplished what you set out to do in terms of like there's a story within a story and there's a different layers. And it was just very interesting to see it unfold and just how small details kind of from the beginning carry over and have a deeper meaning towards the end. So I think you definitely accomplished your mission there.
Oh, thank you. In the treatment that I did wasn't complete enough. Like there was points in the story where I was like, oh, it's going, here's where it's going, here's where the story's going.
Mhm.
Now I gotta, like, I made a decision here in chapter 30, and it's going to impact something in chapter 3. So
Mhm.
I have to go back and, okay, let's rework this and let's put a little clue here, and then I changed something over here, and it was a little bit of a chaotic madness when I was writing it because I was in the middle of this kind of ping pong game with all these clues, and people contacted me at the end. And my sister, was really funny. My sister contacted me and she read it. She said, and she was really great. She sent me these notes, and I kind of said, keep me up to date. My sister's name is Jeannie. Keep me up to date. Where are you at in the book? And she read it really quick in just a couple of days. And she said, we were out to dinner last night and I wanted to leave early so I could come home and read the book. And I thought that would really made me feel great. And then she said, Mike, I finished the book. I loved it. I don't understand it. So my thing was like, well, I don't quite understand it either. So
Yeah.
uh so I explained she's not into the paranormal at all. She's not into the UFO thing at all. She's not into mythology at all. So I was kind of like, here's what this was, and here's this little thing here, and this was a clue. And she'd go, what about this? And I was like, oh, that shows up all the time in the UFO literature. She said, it does? And I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of twists and turns here. So I'm content to talk about stuff, but if there's a spoiler, a really
Yeah,
overt spoiler, I'm going to be careful. And you kind of know what I mean. I
absolutely.
had so much fun writing the writing the plot points that kind of seem to flip the story upside down.
What are
Oh
some
yeah.
of those personal experiences that you've had that kind of have influenced the work that you've been doing?
Well, I mean, then that well this right from the beginning, the stuff with Kristen certainly influenced it, and then what happened after I saw the Three Owls in 2006, and before I started the blog, well, I guess this would go up until today, but it was really intense for a while, for a bunch of years in there, between about 2006 and about 2013. Wow, was my life intense. And what was happening is I was experiencing profound, mind-bending synchronicities that weren't just like, oh, I was thinking of my old friend Bob, and then Bob calls me on the phone. I was like, went way beyond that. And it was almost as if the forces of reality had orchestrated events specifically to knock me off balance. And one of those was uh, there's a story, but a part in the story I almost never tell this, but it was in the story the Neutrogena 45. The character, this is like within the first 30 pages, or maybe even 20 pages. The character finds a bottle of sunblock in the desert, and it's a really prescient moment. I'll tell the real story. What happened? This would have been in around 2006. This would have been in the spring of 2006, and I knew stuff had been going on in my life. Like I knew like these things that happened in my youth, like seeing UFOs and missing time, and I knew those were like I wanted to deny them, but they just kept on rising to the surface. And it's kind of like if you have a pot of water and you put a lid on it, and right before it boils, the pot kind of goes tick tick ting 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 ting. It kind of vibrates. There's kind of a tension created in that pot of water. That's what my life was like. It was just like the lid of my life was just going tinka 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 tinka. It was just about to blow off, and I knew it. And I was like, oh, I don't want to go there. I'm not going there. I don't want to go there. So at that point in my life, I was doing a lot of outdoor work for the school. So there's within the story, there's a huge swaths of it that take place outside in the desert. And I had done a lot of teaching in the desert as well as in the northern Rockies and in mountainous terrain. But the desert has a magical appeal to it. So a lot of that outdoor stuff, sleeping under the stars, finding water, like running out of food, which is something I've done many times, that those are real for me. Those are real life events. That was first person stuff. I was totally at peace writing those. And let me back up. Oh, the Neutrogena. So I would get my face gets really red, and if I use a certain sunblock, like I would just trying sunblocks, and I would put it on my face, and my face would get more red. It would like irritate and sting my face, the sensitive skin of my face. So I would ask people. I would say, I'm in this problem. I can't find the right sunblock." And I was working with people who were outdoors all the time, and they were like, "You need to get Neutrogena 45." And I'd ask someone else, Neutrogena 45. I'd ask someone else, Neutrogena 45. So I was like, okay, got the message. I went to the drugstore and said, "Do you have Neutrogena 45?" I'm like, "No, we don't have it here." And then I went to the health food store and like, "No, we don't have it here." And I was driving home from the town that I was living in. This was the spring in a town in the Rockies. So it's muddy and gray and it's that kind of shoulder season before summer and after the heart of winter. So I'm driving home and I wanted to go to the big grocery store, but I just didn't have it in me. I hated going to that big grocery store. There was a cute little, I was friends with all the people at the health food store. I tried to do all my shopping at the health food store, and that was connected to the little drugstore. It was this cute little hometown thing that the big grocery store had a totally different feel. Didn't want to go there. So I drove past that. And on the way home, there was these bags of trash along the side of the road, which I knew what they were. Every year they would have a trash pickup on the highway. And I was like, oh, I'll do this. I'll pick up some trash. So I pull into my house, which is right along this highway. And then I got a bag. I didn't even go to the house. I just went into the barn, got a couple trash bags, stuffed them in my pockets. And then I said, I'm going to walk to the stop sign. And that's a half a mile away. So I walk a half mile and then I'll cross the highway and I'll walk a half a mile back and pick up trash. So it's a full mile of trash pickup. I figured that's pretty good. So I started walking. As soon as I started walking, it started raining. It was like cold, miserable, wet rain. It was miserable. And then it started sleeting. It was just awful. I was cold. And I was like, I should turn back. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to go to the stop sign. So I'm picking up trash. And this is like gross stuff. This is cigarette butts and old, like, fast food wrappers and stuff. But I get to the stop sign. And leaning against the stop sign is a bottle of Neutrogena 45. And the first thought that pops into my head was, it's them. And I didn't know who them were, but that was clearly in my mind. And I still have it's funny, the bottle, it had spent the winter out and it had melted out of the snow. And the freeze thaw, like it was useless. It was like this gummy, chalky glop that was like intersplit, it was like this yellow oil that wouldn't bind with a chalk glop in there. So it was like useless as sunblock, but the power of it. Now, it was called Neutrogena 45. I was 44 years old. I would be 45 that year. It was at a stop sign. Like stop. It was leaning against a signpost. Like the vocabulary word signpost. Like, oh, it was at a signpost. That is so filled with rich meaning. So I took that story, which is, I hardly tell it anymore. That's a pretty powerful story for anyone. Yeah. And then it's just, I've had so many accounts with that intensity, but that one is folded into the story pretty much exactly. I mean, it's changed to fit the mood of the story, and the sunblock is just fine. So the character has his sunblock. He goes through it's very similar, and the character in the story goes through the same thing, but he finds it at a trail marker, leaning against a signpost. I could go on, but I mean, there's a lot of stories in the book that are real.
Yeah. So now that you've, been doing your research, you've been in this world for a while, who who do you think them are?
Well, the answer would be the UFO occupants, and then that would have to be followed up with, well, I'm not really sure even what or who the UFO occupants are. Like there's a pop culture definition that says they fly a metal spaceship and they come from another galaxy and they come here to visit Earth and they take people out of their beds and do medical exams on them and they abduct people from lonely roads and they fly around aircraft carriers and there's videotape that shows up in the New York Times website. And but for the people who are more deeply immersed in this, like that works. You can cherry pick the data and paint a very vivid picture of metal spaceships coming from another planet piloted by non-human intelligence, basically little skinny aliens with big bald heads and big black eyes. But that falls apart when you look at the data in its totality. Like you can make that case, but in order to make that case that they're aliens from another planet, you have to willfully ignore, I'm going to say, I'm kind of skewed because I'm looking at a certain corner of the data, but you have to willfully ignore huge swaths of the data. And then for the past 15 years, I've been interacting. I talk with people all the time who have these experiences, and almost nobody. I mean, I've heard the stories, but let me tell you, almost nobody tells me a story about being on a table with the creepy medical exams that seem to be the heart of the abduction literature. Less so now, but in the 80s and 90s, it certainly was. What I'm finding is, I talk to these people, they never mention that stuff. They talk about the most powerful synchronicities imaginable, exactly what I described before, as if they were orchestrated by an outside intelligence. And then the questions I ask the witnesses, what was going on in your life leading up to the event? What changed after the event? Are the first two, the event either being an owl event or a UFO event. The third would be, how would you rate your psychic skills? And then how would you rate, do you have healing skills? And I used to ask if you're a creative type, like, are you an artist? And I don't ask that anymore because it's pretty much 100% they say yes. So I don't even bother asking, I just assume. And so those questions aren't addressed at all in the New York Times version of the literature. And like the people who are talking, it every once in a while that leaks out. There's a little hint of it in the congressional meetings or Grush or all the stuff that's going on with this disclosure movement. But you'll get a glimpse of it in the disclosure movement. But I'm talking to people all the time who claim to have had the direct contact experience. They're talking about mystical experiences. They're talking about becoming healers. They're talking about psychic experiences. They're talking about prophetic dreams, all the stuff that a mystic would talk about. So that was what I wanted to imbue into the story, that the characters are going through an initiation process to become a mystic. It felt like, you read the book. Is that safe? Does that seem fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with your use of synchronicity without ever using the word synchronicity, which I appreciated. I think that really does get that through for sure. And to me, just as someone who reads 100 books a year and has for my entire life really, there are lots of authors who try for synchronicity and get chance in fiction, and there kind of is a fine line between chance and synchronicity, and I feel like you do end up where you want to be on that side of the line. I enjoyed that about this book.
When someone has that synchronistic moment, when it happens, I think I even say it, and it's like, it felt like I was ringing like a gong. There is that, like, what just happened? What just happened? I never use the word synchronicity. I never use the word UFO. I never use the word abduction. I use the word shaman twice, and it's right in the beginning. And the line is something like, oh, what about your shaman friend? And then the other guy says, like, he never calls himself a shaman, and I never call him that either. So it's brought up and it's denied right away. So it never comes up again. But it's clear what the role he's playing. And so I wanted to less address the mechanics. I didn't go at all, like why, how is this happening? But I wanted to paint a emotional mood of that awe, that momentary awe, that astonishment. So the main character is kind of in a continual state of astonishment. In the beginning of the story, he's struggling. I say there's two parts of the book. It actually has a part one, and then you turn a page and it says part two, and then you turn the next page. And so there's only two parts in the book. Part one is the main character is struggling. Part two, he's like on a mission. It's a detective novel. Part two is a detective novel. He's on a mission to solve the mystery. The mystery is himself. He's trying to figure out what happened to himself. And there's a few other characters that are sort of sucked into this mystery too. There's kind of a romance in there too, which when I started, I did not expect the romance to like build and build and build. And by the end, it was like that was all the story was about. And I did not expect that. That emerged organically during the writing.
I love that. It's discovery writing. You set out with a plan and then the story takes you in a different direction that you can't even plan out. What I'm hearing you say is that there's a cultural narrative about the phenomenon, whatever could be occupying UFOs, that is more they're researching and studying us. And what you're finding from the people you're talking to is that it sounds like more about expanding consciousness. Does that seem accurate?
There's 100 vocabulary words: expanding consciousness, spiritual awakening, Kundalini awakening, the transformational experience. Yeah, people are being transformed. Oftentimes, spiritual awakening is, all those words are kind of pointing to the same thing. It's very consistent in the individual. Here's a story. I spoke at a UFO conference. I was going to talk about the owls and UFO stuff. This is before the book came out, the fiction book came out. And I have a slide on my PowerPoint presentation. It just says spiritual awakening. And I tell the story of this guy. He saw a UFO or saw an owl. Moments later, he sees a UFO. And then he kind of tells me about his life. And he said, yeah, I had this spiritual awakening that seems connected to all this. It was great. And it was kind of a shocker at the time. I hear it all the time now. But that's a bold thing to do, to stand on a stage with a slide that says spiritual awakening and Helvetica bold and, big letters on a screen. And I was like, oh, can I back that up? I don't know. I was like, guess I hear it sometimes. And I'm like, I'm going to take the slide out. And it's a PowerPoint. You just open your laptop, you find the slide, you hit delete, it's gone. And I was thinking, I should do that. I should do this. This is in my head. And this guy walks up to me, Mike, I'm really looking forward to your talk. I had an experience with an owl and a UFO, and it led to a spiritual awakening. I was like, okay, fair enough. Like, message understood. I got it. I have since asked other researchers, like very plainly, do you get people saying of spiritual awakening? They go, all the time. Why isn't that front and center on the congressional hearings?
Yeah.
I think I know why it started out that way, at least in the 80s. And all the folks who were doing that writing in the 80s and even into the 90s, it seems to me were taking cues from people who did kind of, blue book style investigations. They had a list of things. A lot of it was from MUFON, and MUFON only cared about things that looked like nuts and bolts UFOs. And so they did, a lot of those early folks, I don't think they knew to ask questions that weren't related to that stuff. That's always been my assumption is that they were going off of a script, and people who are a little more modern and the kind of people that we tend to talk to have thrown the script away. Something that I think a lot of people who listen to this this podcast will have heard me talk about Mac Tony's Crypto Terrestrials many times. What they might not know is that you actually did the illustrations in that book. That was to me, like getting back into this kind of stuff after kind of denying part of my life for years. That's one of the first things that I read going back into it last year, just before I actually read Messengers. That really helped me to kind of settle with myself the fact that my experiences were so different from what was, reported with the nuts and bolts folks.
Yeah. Oh, here, let me just. So you must have the barista at the little coffee shop named Tony. That was Mac Tony's. That must have been clear to you.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
so.
Okay. Good.
Thought it
Good.
might
Okay.
be.
Good. Yeah. It was in even when I met Mac, he had a full head of hair. I never met him personally, but we would talk on the phone and stuff like that. And I would. He was very early on in the era of blogging, and so lots of pictures of himself. He did a lot of selfies and but when I met him, he had a full head of hair, and then he shaved his head, which also shows up in the story. The character
Hmm.
Tony, that he there's a day he just shows up at the coffee shop and his head is shaved, and that was and then he says he's a writer. That was all based on Mac Tony's. So in the books, he says I'm writing two books. One is a book of short stories, which Mac published, and the other one was a nonfiction book, which would have been the Crypto Terrestrials. In my mind. Um, and then, oh, as far as you said, MUFON, doesn't didn't recognize that stuff. I called the people at MUFON. I got an old, not that old, maybe it was probably 10 years old now. A The report they have it's just you print out a couple pages, and if you're a MUFON investigator, you print out these couple pages and you fill out the report when you get to a talking to a UFO witness. A couple questions. Some of the questions are exactly what you expect. What was the date? What time did it happen? Did you contact an airport? Which direction was it? Could you draw a picture of it? Exactly the stuff you would expect. And the 100% the correct things you should ask. There's two questions in there. One of them says, has your spirituality or your religion changed?
Hmm.
And the other one is, have you had psychic experiences? Has your have you had an increase in psychic experiences since the event? So MUFON fully knew about this
Interesting.
outlying stuff. They fully knew. But I talked to a guy, his name is Lee Spiegel. He's since passed on. But I talked to him at a UFO conference, and he was working he was posting a lot of articles in the Huffington Post at the time. This would have been around 2012. And I saw him at a conference. I walked to him and I said, I've been reading your stuff in the Huffington Post, and it was all pretty above board kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And I said, how come you never write about the people with the contact experience, the abductees? And he said, oh, that's a very conscious decision. I do that because I want to be taken seriously,
Oh wow.
which I thought was kind of a crappy answer. I was like,
Yeah, for
Yeah.
real.
like you know about it. He was fully aware of it, but he was
Mhm.
like, oh, in order to be taken seriously, I'm not going there. And I think I think that it's not that the people didn't know about this stuff. Bud Hopkins certainly knew about it, and John Mack absolutely knew about it. That was where it really
Yeah.
changed. That was in the forefront of his book, Abduction, which came out, I think, in '94. I think that's right, '94. Um, but people knew about it, but it was just too weird, and they wanted to be taken seriously. And then there's still people out there that you know don't address that aspect. They all know. They all know it. That's you sit next to someone at the bar at the UFO conference, a UFO researcher, kind of a above board nuts and bolts kind of dry UFO researcher. But that's important work to be doing that. But and then you get a couple of glasses of wine, and I'm like, what about the weird? You got any weird stories? And I'm like, oh my god, do I have some weird stories? And then they tell me exactly the stories I hear all the time anyway. So
That figures. So, um, there is in my history when I was a kid an experience that I honestly thought I was never going to tell anybody. Um, and I'd like to tell you guys.
oh please, please.
Um, so there's a segment of your novel where something happens to some of the characters that, while it's not the same as my experience, uh, kind of egged me on to the point where I knew I was gonna tell us at some point. I was hoping it was gonna be with you on, and then you emailed us, and so I was, well, I guess this is going to happen. So that was, like a few days before, I was like, I'm gonna email Mike Clelland and see, and then you emailed us, so that was pretty cool. Um, it's just I haven't had a great context for it, and I wasn't it's one of and people who have listened to most of these episodes. I've talked about some stuff that a lot of people probably wouldn't believe, but this is, I think, more than that. Where so I grew up in a place called Lumberton, North Carolina, which is in the middle of the state. It's dirt road poor. There's really not much to talk about with it, and a bunch of weird stuff has happened to it. A lot of people who are from there. The closest real city is Fayetteville, North Carolina, so 35 minutes away from there. And anybody who's read Chris Bledsoe's UFO of God knows about Fayetteville. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so I grew up 35 minutes from him just 20 years later. He's older than me. Um, and so when I was in third grade, which would have been, I guess, 89 or 90, my class was taken off our regular curriculum for a day. It was in the springtime, and we were given what we were told were IQ tests. And it took the entire day, and it was standardized multiple choice. I don't remember any of the questions because it was 30 years ago, but I remember that was the format. And then, we did it for the whole day. We finished it, didn't think anything about it. A couple weeks later, myself and another student from my class, this girl, we were taken to a school library, which, it's a small rural school, small library. There's only like a couple tables, some chairs, some books, really just a small rural town. At one of those tables was our principal, um, and a man and a woman who I had never seen before. They were wearing dark suits. Um, we sat down, teacher went away. Principal says these folks are from Mensa. They were the reason why you guys took those tests. They got some follow-up questions for you. And then he left the room. And, you know, I'm 9, I'm in third grade. Principal, who I've known for years, tells me that this is what's going on. So I believe him. And, we answer the questions of the people. I don't remember them being like, I really don't remember much about the actual meeting itself. But when I was a kid, there were times when I experienced missing time. I didn't have that term back as a 9-year-old. As an adult, we know more. And so I kind of blinked and I was in class again. I was listening to my teacher talk, which was not super normal for me, but wasn't abnormal either. That night, go home, just telling my parents about my day, and I happened to mention those people, the tests, and all this stuff. And my father was a complicated man, not a particularly nice person. He was a harsh guy. Got very angry that there were strangers who would come to school to ask questions, to the point where I found out later that he actually the next day called the school and reamed out the principal. Apparently, it was a really bad conversation. He was really upset that outsiders had come to say something to his kid without him having known about it. Which, looking back, is very strange because my father was not a what's a good word? He didn't participate a lot. He worked, he paid the bills, he did what he felt like was his duty as an adult human male, and then he just went on with his day. But he was very upset about that happening. And I thought that was it, basically. A year later, same school, same principal, different teacher, because I was in fourth grade instead of third grade. I had a situation where, for a couple of weeks, I was a really scrawny kid. I was little for my age. I was really skinny. And this, for like a month, this kid had been bullying me. And it ended up being a fight in the schoolyard, as kids sometimes do. And it turned out that, I hurt the kid. And my teacher and the principal did not like my father, and they were not interested in telling him that something had happened. I was not injured. And so they told me, hey, as long as the other kid who started it, parents don't push this, we're just not going to tell your parents. Just don't tell your parents, which most people probably would think weird of, but the kind of school this was, the kind of place this was, the kind of person my father was, it does make sense looking back. Well, about a week later, I get pulled out of my class by the principal I had taken to the library again, and at that same table were those same people, but that's not how they were introduced this time. They weren't. I wasn't told that they were with Mensa. I was told that they were with the FBI, and they asked me questions about the fight and the kid and how I felt about it, and if I was angry and things that I now know are questions about like my mental state. And then I blinked again, and I'm back in class in fourth grade this time, going about my day. They were definitely, they were the same people. There was one other time I tried to tell the story to some people. When I was in 18, I was in college. We were talking about different things, and I started telling that story. And one of the people I was talking to told me I was a liar. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, it's not what Mensa does. And I got online. This place is like I was 18. It's pre-Google, but you go to like Ask Jeeves or something, and you look at what is Mensa, and it's a club. It's a real thing. Mensa is a real thing, but it's basically a social club for smart people. You have to pay dues. Mensa doesn't recruit people. People go to Mensa. There's nothing about reality that would have had those people in my school if that's what they are. And then a year later, after I get into a fight, I get pulled in, and they were introduced as different people, but they were the same people.
I've heard stories like that. I have never heard that exact story. I've heard many times, many stories with the same general outline of that story. So what you're telling me is something I've heard many times. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, so in the fictional realm, it's pretty clear what the implications are in the fictional realm in the story, but I included what you experienced. I mean, I couldn't have. I feel like the fictional story that I wrote matched pretty closely what you experienced. And I did that on purpose because I've just heard that story in one form or another. The point in the story where I talk to a guy who has a lot of psychic experiences, pretty just he's really upfront with his psychic abilities. And he's the one that said, like I knew something was up. And the question I purposely failed their test because I didn't want anything to do with them. And that showed up in the book too. So that was a real thing. I've heard that story. I heard one fellow, I want to be careful because this was a long time ago and he never told me not to share this story, but I'll tell it roughly. He won the prize at like a science fair in his junior high school. He was pretty young. I think it was junior high school. It might have been high school. But and he said, this science, my thing that I did for the science fair wasn't that special. Lots of other people did little things that were much more impressive than what I did. So I should not have won, but he won the prize the prize was to spend a weekend at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Hmm.
So he remembers, and then he says, I remember pulling out of the driveway, driving down the road in my neighborhood, and then I remember coming back and pulling into the driveway. And it was like one of those this would have been, he's probably roughly my age, so that would have been in the early 70s, maybe mid 70s. So it was that kind of bland sedan that you would see. And the Air Force people had their Air Force uniforms on. And he said they weren't very friendly. They were kind of gruff. And he actually said there was a point when he was saying how to get back home that he remembers. This is when he this first memory is that when he was going home, he said, like they were going to get ready to pull in the driveway, and he said, "Turn right here," like right into my driveway. And this kind of gruff guy said, "Don't say it like that. Turn into the driveway. Say it like that. You don't use right or only use right when you're using right or left." Like a kind of tough military guy would say something like that, or a kind of someone with military training would. So that was basically he pulls out of the driveway, and the next thing he knows is this guy saying, don't say turn right here. Either say turn into the driveway or give a right and left command.
Wow.
And so there's the whole weekend is missing.
Fun. Yeah.
So these, I got lots. I mean, this is part of the mystery. So I mean, was it the FBI? Like, good grief. I mean, I don't know who it was. And in the story, there's kind of a foggy, never quite say who are they. They're called the team, and it's really mysterious. You don't never quite know if they're good or bad. I don't even know if they're good or bad, the people in that team. But they were, I certainly tried to make them mysterious, and I did that on purpose. So yeah, you are not alone in these experiences. It's
Something that
very
I've always
common.
kind of connected to this kind of stuff was the fact that and my father passed in 2020. He died during not of COVID, but during early COVID when it was hard to get good hospital care
Hmm.
because everything was just really confused. Um, and he served for 6 years during the Vietnam era, and always said that he was never in Vietnam. Um, but there were parts of the things that he did and places he was and jobs he would never talk about. And there were a couple times throughout my young life that he would be confronted with someone who had served with him, and he always did his best to get away from them as quick as possible, make sure they didn't talk about stuff they did in front of us. And that reaction he had had to someone from outside coming in and talking to me always had the same feeling to me. We also moved around a ton as a kid. He always had really like low profile jobs. He was a very hard to deal with, but very intelligent person. But he didn't always act like it. And I think some of that was an act. I think he was, I think, running from something, and I think it had something to do with his military service in the 70s.
Mm, yeah.
Stuff that I will probably never have any answer to, honestly.
I understand that. Yeah. And that's I think it's more mysterious. So as an author, I mean, this is my first time I ever attempted fiction, and I've read a lot of books, and I've actually seen more movies. I've seen a lot of movies. So the book to me was like, I was seeing the movie in my head, but sort of the less you know about the mystery behind the curtain, the more mysterious it is, and the potential is that if you pulled the curtain back and actually saw what happened, it would be less mysterious than the mood you have created in your own mind.
For sure.
So, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah.
Do any of the people that you've talked to, have any of them, like people who have had missing time, do they ever start having pieces of that time put back into place, like memories starting to come through, or is it just kind of like missing time is missing time and there's nothing that comes back?
Both. Yeah. I have a lot of people who have a little bleed through, or like this. I wish I could think of a good example right off the top of my head. I'll try to, but where something will happen, and then whoomp, they'll just be flooded with this instantaneous knowing of the entire event. I've also talked to a lot of people, and I've done it myself. I've gone through hypnotic regression, and then the events play out under the hypnosis session. And wow, I'm cautious. Like I'm not skeptical. Like I recognize people have these experiences and memories come back. How much to trust those memories is very personal. I'm not going to tell someone what they should or shouldn't do, but what I can say is that from my own experience, um, the stories that have emerged under hypnosis, and some of them are very complicated and weird and life changing in a way. I will make myself crazy if I try to know if they're real or not. But I've certainly talked to people who have missing time, don't know, like blocked. And then I've talked to other people who have been blocked for years, and one little event will trigger something. Um, uh, yeah, yeah. So, there was and it might not be, so they might not even, so the problem with missing time is you might not even know it's missing, right? So my strong sense is that there's, there's absolutely no way I can give a number or quantify this or is that there's more people who have had this mysterious contact experience in their life than we would dare admit or dare guess. I think the number is higher, shockingly higher than we would think. Some researchers put it at 2% of the population. That's a lot, right? So that's just strictly American, or 3%. That's 100 million people, basically. And did I get through that right? I think I'm not sure for. No, that's 1 million people. Excuse me, 1 million people of the population. If it's 3% of the American population, roughly, which is a lot. But on my census, it's probably higher than that, and that there are the gradations of it where people are interacted with their lives, have confronted something in a mysterious, elusive way, much more like a guardian angel whispering in their ear rather than being taken on board a metal spaceship. I'm being very loose here because I haven't. It's very nebulous to try to guess what may not have happened. So I simply don't know. But given the people I've talked to, that's my very strong sense.
There's the rooster.
Yeah, they're loud. Wow, are they loud? Yeah.
Yeah, that to me, as the the self-proclaimed skeptic of the two, I have said many times, I'm not skeptical of someone saying that they've experienced a thing. I'm skeptical of the conclusions that we draw. And
Oh,
it seems
yes. Yeah.
seems to me like the much more likely outcome for a lot of this stuff is that it is actually all the same phenomenon, and the which is kind of like where John Keel was starting to go, and where MacTonies went, and where a bunch of other people who are contemporary are as well. Is these things are we're too presumptuous about what things are, and we need to look for the kind of the lines that maybe connect stuff.
And I'm in a place where my the way of painting a picture for me is much more as just simply tell the story and then do as little analysis or editorializing or at the as little as possible. The story should have its own mood and feel and vibe to it. And that reaction you get to it is the emotional deep reaction to it, where it touches you at an archetypal level or at a soul level or at a subconscious level is more important to me than how it fits into like a spreadsheet in a database, So, and I can't explain. I can dance around. I could sound pretty good and make some guesses on what might be going on, but that's all they would be, is speculation and guesses.
Yeah, I think the desire for a spreadsheet really is where a lot of people get caught up in this like hashtag disclosure stuff. As if you need the government's permission for something to have happened to someone. I mean,
Yeah.
they can't balance the federal checkbook, let alone find out what exactly is happening on this thing or that thing. To me, that's all wishful thinking.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny that I'm being very, very loose with my caricatures here, but those people who want to put it into the spreadsheet, those people are called men, and the people who are doing the more elusive, airy-fairy stuff with spiritual awakenings and consciousness and higher selves, those are women. That's a caricature that's based on real life. There's plenty of exceptions to those, but it's funny. I talked to one guy and he was like, "Oh, I had this total epiphany." Do you know who Grant Cameron is?
I don't think I do.
Oh, he's funny. He's super. He's from Canada. He talks a mile a minute. And he's really animated and he's a great researcher and a big thinker. But he had been doing presidential research. He'd go to the presidential libraries and scour and really, really going in there with the paper and rolling his sleeves up and doing real research and and what, what the president knew, what the president knew when, how to back it up, how to confirm these things. And so it was completely above board government document type research.
Mm.
And then he had this epiphany one day. Whoosh, it was in 2012, and then he was like, "It's consciousness. It's all about consciousness. It doesn't have anything to do with the. I've been talking. I'm like at the fort. Nobody's looking into the consciousness thing." And I talked to, and he's like, "I'm on this totally new trajectory, and no one's looking into this." And I'm like, I had this conversation. He was completely amped up and excited about this new thing that he's like, his old world had crumbled, and he's in this new dynamic thing that he's at the forefront. And I'm like, Grant, like you're like lots of people are talking about this stuff. You've been talking, like, they're called women. You go to the conference, and those ladies with the flowy dresses and the turquoise earrings, you sit and talk to them. They're going to tell you about their psychic experiences. They're going to tell you about their transformational experiences. They're going to tell you about their Kundalini awakening, and they're going to tell you how it's tied into to their UFO contact experience. It's like, it's not hidden. So that was meant for a laugh in a way, but it's true. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that is, not to generalize, but like masculine energy is more about like facts and data and numbers, and then the feminine energy is more about receptivity and
Mm-hmm.
being and, that type of thing. So to me, that completely makes sense.
Sure, there's more engineers. They go to a college and look at the engineering departments, mostly men. You go to the social sciences and
Technology.
art, and it's mostly women. And it's, again, it's
Yeah.
a caricature, but it's
Yeah.
statistically I've never crunched the numbers, but I'm certain it plays out like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I know you said that you can't definitively say like why owls, but what guesses or what theories do you have based on your research of like why owls keep showing up in this way?
Can I read something out of a book?
Sure.
People ask me this, and
Absolutely.
the best thing I can do is read out of a book. I get to ask
Yeah.
this every once in a while. I'm like, yeah, where's my book? I got it right here. Let me just read it right from the book. Um, so my second book is called Stories from the Messengers. So do you know Richard Dolan in this field?
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So he published my first book, and he's like he's pretty strong personality, and I sent him the manuscript of my first book before it had been fully edited. It was a rough manuscript, but it was 99% there. I sent him the manuscript of my first book, and he's like, he's like, Mike, I want to publish this. He ran a publishing company for a while. He no longer runs the publishing company in the same way that he did, because he's gotten into different stuff. So I ended up getting the rights back, which was unheard of. Like, no publisher would just like, here, have your rights back. Like,
Nice.
I'm moving on to different stuff, and I'm like, okay. So now I have the rights to my book, which is this gracious act on his part. But when I was doing the first book, it's a big fat book, it's 400 pages. I'm going to be very cautious. He called me up at night, and he would edit at night. And I think he had a glass of brandy on the side. So he called me up, Mike, I'm loving this book. I'm really loving your book. I'm really into it. Like, I'm about halfway through. When do I get to the part? When do I get to that part where you sum it up and you tell me like what the owls mean? I'm like, when do I get to that part? And I'm like, you're going to be really disappointed. And because I don't. And then I followed that first book up with the Stories from the Messengers, which is essentially stories that wouldn't fit into the big first book. They were like too long and too complicated, and there were some that I want. So it was a collection of stories that essentially wouldn't fit into the first book. And then he's like, Mike, like, you are not getting off the hook. You are not getting off. You're not going to publish 2 books about owls and UFOs and not have some sort of supposition on what it may or may not mean. Like, I'm holding your feet to the fire. You're like, no way am I publishing a book without you. It's like, okay, so this is the best I can do. Again, and I'm reading right from Stories from the Messengers. Again, why owls? On a purely intellectual level, I don't know, yet my gut feeling gives me a glimpse into some possible answers. Here are 4 ideas on what owls might mean, each of which are followed up with another question. Right? So I answer it, and then I immediately say, well, I don't know what it means. So number 1, owls are alarm clocks. The simplest answer would be that they are here to wake us up. But wake us up to what? Number 2, owls are an archetype. They are a symbol, an image stored deep within humanity's genetic memory bank. It's as if there are hidden meanings locked away within our grand shared consciousness. and the owl is a key. We think in symbols, and the owl is touching us on that level. And this deeper knowing goes back to the dawn of man. But what is the hidden archetypal meaning? Number 3, owls are here to announce initiation. An initiation is a ritual, like the young Catholic receiving the Eucharist during their first Holy Communion. Owls often seem to show up just before the arrival of a UFO, as if to announce an impending ritual. Religious scholars would argue that the initiation rites are metaphoric of a profound change within the initiate. But the true believer wouldn't see the initiation as a metaphor. The change would be entirely real. But an initiation into what? Number 4. Number 4, owls are a totem of the transformational experience. Seeing a UFO can transform someone. I've spoken to a lot of people who've seen strange craft in the sky, and in that moment, their entire definition of reality is altered. I've also spoken to people who have had owl sightings at such highly charged moments that it transformed their lives. But a transformation into what? So those 4 answers are followed up with 4 kind of understandable questions. That's the best I can do as far as what it might
Awesome.
mean.
I mean, no answer to any real big question is going to not have other questions to come off of it. That's just how life works.
Exactly. The deeper the mystery, the more difficult it is to come up with an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Can I tell a story about the book, writing the book?
Absolutely. Please do.
So there's a sequence in the book. If you just both read it, you'll know. There's a sequence that takes place under a swing set. And there's 2 characters, sort of a love interest budding, and they're at an abandoned old playground at an elementary school in this dusty, isolated corner of the desert, and kind of a ghost town. And 2 owls land on the top of the swing set, and then that they are essentially the metal pipes and the chains, they're essentially electrically zapped somehow. And it creates a sort of out-of-body mystical experience for both of them. They enter this timeless realm. I was basing it entirely on the near-death experience. I've read a lot about near-death experience, talked to a lot of people who've had near-death experience. The experience they had, I just made up, but it was 2 people who had a shared near-death experience. And let me back up a little bit. So this was based on a story in my first book, a woman, Susan, in The Messengers. She was on a hammock, but her story is that it was an Easter Sunday, which is a powerful day of death and rebirth and transformation, a symbolic day of the calendar in the Western world, death and rebirth. Christ is risen from the dead, and he is an exalted godlike being after he returns, as opposed to before, where he was a human. He had all the frailties of a human, and afterwards he was something beyond that. So she's at a Easter party, and she said, she talked to her husband, and she said, oh, like something's happening. Like I'm having this energy running up and down my spine. I got to get out of here. And they came in separate cars, and he said, okay, they had their daughter, and they said, I'll bring her home after the party. And so she runs home, and it's Easter Sunday. So it's springtime. This is in Massachusetts. And she lays down in a hammock in the backyard, a beautiful spring day. And as soon as she lays in the hammock, so the hammock is tied between 2 trees, one at her head, one at her feet. As soon as she lays down, an owl lands in the one tree, and then an owl lands in the other tree. So there's 2 owls between her, and the owls are hooting back and forth at each other. She says it plainly. I recorded this interview. She says it plainly. She said, energy was coursing up and down my body, back and forth along her spine. I actually asked, did you have a Kundalini awakening? And she said, no. But she's describing what sure sounds like Kundalini awakening, but I got to trust her. So she says no. but she was describing a powerful mystical experience on that. And then her husband comes home and she said, "How you feeling, Susan? Are you okay?" And she said, "What do you see?" And he said, "Well, there's an owl in that tree, and there's an owl in that tree, and they're hooting at each other." And she goes, "Uh-huh, uh-huh." She said, "I was being recalibrated." When I talked to her, she said, "I was being recalibrated." I get the visual image of a circuit board in like three components, one on one side, one on another, and another component in the middle. And they're some sort of like juicing up the battery somehow. And the two owls are the two outside components, and Susan in the middle is the getting juiced up. So she said after that, she said, "No one even, I didn't even ask. I didn't put out she said, I never hung a shingle out." And people would contact her and say, "Can you do an energy healing for me?" She's not an energy healer. And she said, "Okay, I'll try." And she was doing energy healing and getting really profound results.
Oh.
So that's the thing. That's the question I ask. Do you have any healing abilities after this experience? There's no UFO in the story, but I will say that Suzanne is someone, she worked with Dr. John Mack at the time when he was still alive. And she's had a powerful set of experiences that fit right into the playlist or whatever you call it. So back to the book. I used that real life experience. I put it into the book in a fictionalized form where these people have a shared near death experience similar to the two owls, generating energy that's running through both of them. They talk about the hair running up on their hair stands up on their arms, and there's the chains get cold, and there's a buzzing, and so I play it up as an electronic kind of thing. Now, I was so nervous about writing that part, when I was like, there's a follow-up part where I describe that timeless zone. And I wanted to be really poetic, and I wanted to really go for it. And I was so nervous about writing that. And I'm actually and people have talked about that one segment. I'm really proud at how that turned out. And then I was like, I didn't want to write it. I stayed up late, and I was like, there was one night I was like, I got to do this. So I stayed up late and I wrote in a big rush. And the next morning I'm editing it. I'm like, okay, I repeated this word. Let me take that out. Oh, I should put a comma here instead of a period. And I was just doing the normal cleanup that any writer would do on a block of text. And I'm in the middle of it and I'm like, what did I just do? What did I just do? Like I'm like I created this whole story hinges on this moment under the swing set. And it's two people having a shared near-death experience. I'm like, I just made it up. It doesn't make sense. This is the stupidest thing I could have done. Like it's such a huge leap for the reader. Like no one's going to buy this. It's impossible. Like a shared near-death experience. And then as I was like really disillusioned, like ugh, like my heart sank. Like I've been working on this book for, at that point, I mean, I started in 2010. This is like 2000, so for 12 years, a dozen years I've been working on this book, and it's not going to work. And then at that moment I'm like, oh my word, I'm gonna fall asleep. Felt like I was gonna my head's gonna slam on the desk. I'm like, I gotta fall. I'm just about to pass out. And so I laid down and boom, I went right out, took a nap. And then I woke up a while later and it was like one of those things where I was like, whoa, is it morning? Like, wow, was I out? And I go back to the desk and I get a message. And it's someone wants to be my friend on Facebook. And I never check these things. But this was kind of like, there's these bots and it was a woman. And I was like, there's all these scams out there. I'm going to check. I'm going to Google her name. So I Google her name. Her name is Scarlett Heinbuch. She's given me permission to use her name. So I Google her name. She wrote a book about a shared near-death experience. She was doing Reiki on someone she had never met. This guy was at a hospital. The man's mother said, "My son is about to die. I came from out of town. I'm here because my son is about to die." And she said, "Oh, I'll provide some comfort. I'm a Reiki healer. I can provide some comfort. Do I have your permission to do Reiki on your son?" And she said, yes. She went to the hospital. She was all alone in the room. Person she never met, tape over his face. He was on a ventilator, so he couldn't breathe by himself. He had tubes up his nose. His hair was covered by a little hospital hat. And so she didn't even know what he looked like. And she holds his hand. She begins the Reiki process, and whoop, she's like vaulted into this other realm. She's in this magical, she wrote in her book, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. She wrote about how she was vaulted into this realm of absolute love and eternity and timelessness. And she's like, and there he is. He's like going into the light. There's this guy. He's like going into the light. And she grabs his hand. And she's like, in that moment, she's like, I know this guy. I've known him all my life. I've known him through all eternity. I've known him through my past life. And she pulls him back. And then afterwards, she kind of comes back to her real life. And then afterwards, the doctors he was dying of kidney failure. And the way you test kidney failure is just do a blood test, and there's levels of enzymes and such that are recognizable to a doctor in the blood. And afterwards, there was his kidneys, which were basically not functioning, like he was dying. And then he looked at it, this man has perfectly healthy kidneys. There's no evidence at all that there's kidney damage. And they've been married for like 12 years now.
Oh,
That's wild.
This happened. I met this woman, Scarlett, in the moment where I was at my lowest point. Like, oh shit, did I mess up? Like I did the stupidest thing, and then instantly, it's synchronicity, right? I know what a synchronicity is, right? This is something else entirely.
beyond.
This
Yeah.
felt like the whatever it was, the gods, something orchestrated this. She hit send on her friend request to me at the exact. Oh, anyway, it just goes. So I said, okay, leaving it in the book. Never questioned it after that. So
That is
and
absolutely incredible.
the whole book was like that. That's a good example, but the whole book was like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
When reality is stranger than fiction. I mean, really, like that story that you just shared about that woman is incredible, and just the connection with you. And, I mean, I think a lot of your story and the main character is about somebody who feels very lost, but is actually being guided.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, oh, here, let me but the book is called "I Met My Husband on the Other Side" by Scarlett Heinbuch. It's totally worth reading. It's a little
Yeah.
short book. It's an easy read. She's a great writer. It just sings with this heartfelt emotion. She's like a radiant being. So, the it's very clear. There's points where a voice from his dead friend will say, turn left. Like, and he's being guided. He's like, you turn left here, you turn right here. And yeah, exactly. And then there's the question I would ask when people are reading the story initially, there's a point in the beginning where the main character goes off into the desert and just wanders alone. And this is Jesus on his 40 days alone in the wilderness. This is the Aboriginal walkabout. I mean, this is the the young shaman in South Dakota that gets kicked out of the tribe, and like, you go walk alone, you go up to the top of the mountain and have a vision quest. I was basing it on that. I asked a woman. So the question I would ask people: did the stuff in the desert? Here, I can ask you too, both of you, right here. You can, yes or no. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Did the stuff in the desert when he was alone? Was that too long? Like,
No.
should I have made that shorter?
No, I think it was exactly what it should have been.
Okay, I was a little longer in the first draft, and I was pretty bold as far as some stuff I snipped out. Great. Okay, so I asked a woman, and her name is Althea Provost, and she just put a book out herself too. And I asked her, she's a smart, sensitive, spiritual woman, and I asked her, like, that's part in the desert, but did that go on too long? And she said, that was a ritual as old as time. And I was like, oh, because I never said, like, it was presented like he was in the midst of this ritual. I never called it a ritual. And but that told me that, like, people were getting what I was trying to say.
Yeah, especially since he's has some amount of preparation. He goes through his food, all of that. He spends the time without resources. That's what I assumed you were going for with
Mhm.
that. Another thing, something that's very funny to me is Brittany actually just put out a couple months ago her first novel, and the main character's name in her first novel is Brittany.
Althea. Althea. Yeah.
Oh, it's Althea. How
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Oh, Althea's great. Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. I don't know what kind of name is that. I'm trying. Is it Greek or something? It sounds like a.
You know, I wrote this. I started writing this book a long time ago. I don't know exactly, but it has to do with the moon. I believe because that's a
It's
lot of like what
it's actually healer in Greek.
healer. Oh, okay, never
Okay.
mind then.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah. Synchronicities everywhere.
And I mean, these are, and the more highly charged the project, the more highly charged the synchronicities, I think.
Hmm.
I mean, you can certainly get synchronicities if you're fixing the kitchen sink and you got to go to off or a Lowe's, and get a special screwdriver or something like that. You can certainly have synchronicities there, but I think the more powerful ones are going to be when you're pouring your heart into a novel that's got a mythic theme.
Some of the stories you shared, especially the one you just shared about Susan, that seems like in your own stories, those were very much real owls. What would you say is like how many stories are about real owls versus maybe screen memories that you've encountered?
In my research,
Hmm.
I would say half. That's a rough estimate. Half are, oh, I was driving down the road at night and I saw a 4-foot owl in the road. I mean, I suspect your listeners are up to speed on what a screen memory is, and I can certainly go through that if you want. But
Sure, go ahead.
yeah, so what's commonly reported in the field, in the literature, when you talk to people who have first-person experiences, they'll say like, "Oh, I was driving down the road at night and I was alone and I turned a corner and there was a 4-foot tall owl in the road." And and they pull up to it and it's like they'll describe the owl looking over their hood. And like owls simply don't get to be 4 foot tall. Like you get the smallest car and the biggest owl, it's not going to be able to look over your hood. And they're like, oh, it was kind of a funny thing. And then I kind of went home and I was like, oh, I should have been home at midnight. I was home at 2 in the morning and something happened. They're very commonly reported. It's called a screen memory. The implication is that an an alien, most probably the gray, the typical gray with the big black eyes and the bald head and the skinny body, is somehow putting a psychic projection into the mind of the observer, whether it's done through psychic means or technological means. I can't even begin to guess what the answer to that might be. But um, and the sense is, now this is interesting. You talk to a UFO researcher and you say, why are they using owls as a screen memory? And they'll say, well, the owl sort of looks like a gray alien, right? It's got the big eyes, and it's like, oh, that kind of falls apart but so, and you can talk to researchers, the hypnosis, people who do hypnosis on people, they'll say, okay, describe the owl you see in the road. And the person under hypnosis will say, well, it's skinny and it's got a tight fitting spacesuit on and it's got long skinny fingers and it's got a bald head and big black eyes. And I don't think it's an owl. So for some reason, they're choosing to show themselves as something when in fact they are something else. The UFO researcher would say it would be too unsettling and too jarring to see an alien in the road. So they present themselves as an owl. Now, it's not just owls. It's deer and owls are at the top of the list, unquestionably. At the top of the list and what gets reported as a screen memory. But below that, it's firemen and raccoons and squirrels. I've got lots of stories about people like, oh, I woke up in bed and sat up and there was a 4-foot tall squirrel at the foot of my bed. Like, that there's no such thing. Like, that's plainly something else is going on. And then clowns. Clowns are reported. Jesus gets reported. Relatives get reported. Dead relatives get reported. So it gets very, very murky. Raccoons. I said raccoons. And then, and I got lots of stories in all these. And once you've heard that story like 500 times, you get it. You don't need to hear. You get it. In my first book, The Messengers, I tell the screen memory thing very early on, and I just move on. Like like, okay, that's part of it, but I'm much more interested in the people who are seeing real owls or symbolic owls. Um, I was living with a woman in upstate New York for a while. Her name is Andrea, and she called me out into the driveway one time. She's had a lot of experiences with owls and UFOs. That's how we met. And so she calls me out in the driveway, and we had a dirt driveway, and it was like in the Adirondacks. So, and she's like, look what the snails did. And the snails, like the little snails, like they would, after it rains, they would like walk around the sand in the driveway would pool at one's part. And so these little snails made a tracks. And I kid you not, it was an owl. It was like a little drawing of an owl. It wasn't sophisticated, but I mean, if a 10-year-old did a drawing of an owl with a crayon, it would be about that same. So there was an owl drawn in the
Wow.
sand by snails in front of our house. So like I got so many stories like that. How do you make sense of these? So your question was about, it's about 50%. I would love to crunch the numbers and actually know. It's difficult. Some people tell me
Mhm.
stories at a conference. Some people tell me stories over a phone. Some people send them an email. Some people send them on Facebook. Some people send them on Twitter. Some people send them on Instagram. Like it's tough to make a concrete answer out of any of these things. But I would say that it's half. Here, I'm going to tell one more thing. When I talk to people on the phone, um, I'll have a clipboard. I'll keep notes. I'll put the date, I'll put their phone number, I'll put their name, and I'll make some notes. So if they ever call back or they ever reach out to me again, I can like, oh, let me just refer to this, and I can say, oh, you're the guy that had the thing with this. Okay, gotcha. So I mean, it's like I feel like I've forgotten more owl stories than anyone on earth has ever heard. But in the corner of the clipboard on the piece of paper, I write Reiki in the corner. And you know what Reiki therapy is and Reiki healing
I'm a
is.
Reiki master, yeah.
That does it. Why am I not surprised? So I put Reiki in the corner and I just wait. I just wait. And at some point they'll say, oh, I'm a Reiki master. Oh, I've just got my level 3 certification. Or, oh, like Susan Kornacki did not say oh, that was her last name. I use her last name in the story. So Susan from the hammock story said she started doing hands-on energy healing. She never called it Reiki. She said it wasn't Reiki. It was just something organically she did. She's not trained in anything. So I would put her in that category. Um, so that healing. So this is people who have had a UFO and an owl experience, and they find me. I've got thousands of these reports. I would say that half of them are either Reiki healers or doing something very similar to Reiki healing. Half. I'll tell
That's
you, half the general
incredible.
population is not a Reiki healer, but
Right.
half. That's astounding number.
It really is.
That's wild.
Fascinating.
Can
Yeah.
I tell another story? I just had
Absolutely,
coffee, so
please.
I just had a strong cup of coffee, so I'm kind of on a roll here. A woman gets a hold of me. She's wonderful. I had a long conversation with her. She was pulling into her driveway, and what she thought was a little kid in the driveway, but as she pulled in and the headlights hit it, it turned out to be an owl. The owl flew up into a tree and landed in a tree. She calls her son out, her teenage son, says, come on. She gets him on the phone. Get out here right now. There's an owl in a tree right next to the garage. And the owl, when the boy comes out, the owl flies down and touches the top of her head and flies off. And the boy is like, Mom, are you okay? Did it hurt? What happened? Are you okay? And she said, oh, it was so gentle. It was so gentle how it touched the top of my head. So she was on the phone when she pulled in to her driveway, and this owl touched her head. Now later, she goes on a hike with a friend. She calls it her metaphysical friend. And they go on a hike, and they come back and it's dark. So the sun is going down. So they get to the parking lot, and they look up from the parking lot. It's nighttime now. And they said, no big deal. We do this hike all the time. So we knew just where we were. We knew how to get back on the trail. We had flashlights. And so they get to the parking lot, and they look up, and there's this craft, what she described as a structured craft flying over the parking lot. But all they could really see was the lights, the outline of it. She sent me a picture. This is really tough, right? People send me pictures, and oftentimes it's just some dots, right? So there's like, yes, there's some dots in the sky. I'm really, but then she said, and then everything in the parking lot turned red. The trees turned red, the cars turned red, the asphalt turned red, everything turned red. And I've heard this before. This doesn't get reported very. I've only heard it in green. She said red. So everything turned red, and then it went back to normal. And she has pictures of and it. She has pictures of like the asphalt. Like there's the parking lot, and it looks like it's made out of like cherry licorice.
Wild.
Hmm.
Yeah. So then she says, and during this point, like leading up to this, she was at a baseball game. Her son plays little league. Kids in the neighborhood. She talks to his mom. She's in the little stand. You can imagine, just strikes up a conversation with the woman next to her. She doesn't really know, but the kids are playing in the same baseball team. And she says, what's going on? And the lady says, oh, it's not good. I need a kidney transplant or I'm going to die. And the lady, without hesitating, says, I'll give you mine. And the lady says, oh, that's all well and good, but it doesn't work like that. We'd have to be compatible. You're gonna have to go to a doctor. You're gonna have to get a series of tests. She says, I'll get the tests. So she goes to the doctor. She gets the tests. The doctor calls up and says, is this your sister? Like, is this your sister? She said, no, it's just some lady in the neighborhood. I said, okay, just doing the blood work and everything like that. You're so compatible that I was almost going to ask, is this your twin sister?
Hmm.
So she gives her kidney to the woman. She's doing fine. The other woman is doing fine. They're both in perfect health. And this was happening in the lead up at the time of this. So then I asked, well, who were you talking to on the phone? And I was talking to my dad. What were we talking about? She said, I was telling him I am going to give my kidney away. She said, she pulls into the driveway, says, I am going to give my kidney away. An owl touches her head.
Wow.
I don't have to ask her if she's a Reiki healer, right?
Right.
Well, you don't give them no more selfless act than giving your kidney
Yeah.
away. I don't know if I would give my kidney away to some stranger at the baseball field. Isn't that this is the flavor and mood of these stories. They are
Yeah.
so rich in power and emotion and just,
Yeah.
this sounds like if I watched this in a Hallmark movie, I would say
Right.
this is too corny. Like, I don't buy it. It's too much. But that's what's emerging. Like stories of such emotional richness and such emotional power. And that's what I struggled to put into the story, into the fictional story. That ever-present mood of some urgency just outside our ability to comprehend. There's some
Mm-hmm.
palpable urgency, like pushing these people on. The characters were pushed on because of this urgency.
There's been so many times during this conversation I've just been like floored, mind blown. You've done it again. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing because you are helping tell people's stories and you're helping shift the narrative. Like we were talking about in the beginning of there's a very, like almost, I don't know, the cultural narrative is a little bit darker, right?
Mm,
And in the stories that you've collected are more about spiritual awakening, expanding consciousness, love. I mean, like you said, what greater act of love can you do than giving somebody your kidney or
mm,
meeting your partner on the other side? Like
mm.
these are beautiful stories. So thank you so much for what you're doing and sharing them.
Oh, it's been an absolute honor to do this. It's funny, like I'm self-published books. Like no one's getting rich. I mean, there may be some. I'm not getting rich off self-published books. Like I'm barely scraping by. But it's like I have no choice in the morning but to get up, open my email inbox, answer some owl stories, try to make sense of them, try to figure out a way to put them in a either a fictional story or in a blog post or try to share. Like I don't want these stories to be hidden away. I want the power of these stories to be out there. The subtitle of my second book, it's Stories from the Messengers, and the subtitle is Accounts of Owls, UFOs, and a Deeper Reality. I there's a richness to these stories. I don't care if anyone believes that UFOs and owls are connected. What I do care about is that there is a richness and a depth to this, to our reality as a totality. And that's what I have come away with as far as my own life. Like, I realize I am not in a dry, empty, materialistic reality universe. I'm in a rich, multidimensional, overlapping, in a relationship with some other reality and it's showing up in my email inbox without, I mean, I put some effort into it. I wrote these stories, I wrote the books, I put out a blog post. I'm asking the question, I want to hear your owl stories. I'm getting the answer. I'm flooded with the answer to the point where I don't know what more I can do. But I feel like I cannot turn away from this. And it's not just owls. It's like, it's a lot of stories with the same richness and the same power that I'm receiving. So I'm not locked into owls in any way, but it's been a wonderful thread to pull on, right? So the UFO mystery in its totality goes from government conspiracies on one end to people in Sedona channeling their space brothers on the other end, and there's all kinds of messed up stuff in this data pool in the middle. Some of it is messed up. That's a wrong way to say it. There's all kinds of messy stuff in this data pool where it's really hard to, like, you look at one, and by being myopic on one thing, which I certainly am, like, it's hard to absorb everything else. So I think everyone in this pool is a generalist in the UFO lore. Is, it's, you almost have to have your specialty. So my specialty, I didn't ask for it. It happened in the mountains of Wyoming with Kristen in 2006. But I've been pulling on the thinnest little thread. And when I started pulling on it ages ago, I thought I'll write a magazine length article and be done with this. And that has absolutely not been. It has just been rich. And the reason I am content and inspired and alive with this research is because of the story of that life. For instance, the woman who gave her kidney away. That is not an outlier. That's a story I can tell quickly. Some of them take a long time to tell. That's a story I can take quickly. But that is the flavor and mood of what I've been finding, of such magnificent, life-affirming power in these stories.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Well, we have gone through everything. I was going to ask you more, and this has been an awesome, awesome talk. How can people find your book?
You can Google UFOs Owls. I'm the first thing that comes up. And if you scroll down there, you'll find my website. And I have a website which is kind of an overview, which is called MikeClelland.com. And Clelland is CLELLAND, MikeClelland.com. And that's kind of a hub which will take you to the Amazon page, as well as to some of my podcasts, as well as to some illustration work that I've done and things like that. So that's a good source. And then my blog, I was very active for about a decade. I have not done much with the blog in a while. I basically use the blog now just to promote the books. It seems like we're in an Instagram world, and the blog is kind of like might as well be written on Mastodon hide or something like that. It's so outdated at this point. So, and then my books are easily available at Amazon. So
wonderful. Well, I was reading your blog yesterday, preparing for this interview.
Oh, right on.
It's very well written and lots of wonderful stories. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. This has been an amazing conversation, and I can't wait to read more from you.
Well, this has been my honor. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, man. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.